stay forward a lifetime after if you're my baby. And I know this world is so crazy. Give me, hate me, call me crazy. There's no truth on my name.
I used to dream in parables, partially love you naturally, happily ever after. Cigarettes over blunts, now miracle whip at Funtown. Summertime, delight, Mississippi over ice, Janet Jackson and flashing lights. We can dance with them if you like to. My vagabonds are lonely, rollers celebrating like you. Protect the record, overzealous, and I really like you. Sing with me, paranoia like me. Piano was a green red, your fingers were a green hue. Watch you make the rainbow out of the sacrificial love of the Ali, feeling holy. The DJ was religion, I swear on Napoleon on me.
It's just a dream. Don't call me crazy. It's been so cold. Love is just what it is. So tell me what you call me at night.
This movie that I think you like. This guy decides to quit his job and head to New York City. This cowboy's running from himself. She's been living on the high shelf. And they come unstuck. Running down to the riptide, taken away to the dark side. I wanna be your left-hand man. I love you when you're singing that song, yeah. I got a lump in my throat 'cause you're gonna sing the words wrong. I just wanna know if you're gonna stay. I just gotta know. I can't have it any other way. I swear she's destined for the screen. Closest thing to Michelle Pfeiffer that you've ever seen.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Megan Simmons. I am currently a sophomore at Barnard College of Columbia University up in New York City, where I study political science. And I have the great opportunity and fortune to be here today because I was able to serve as a student advisor for TNTP over the summer in the lead up to the launch of the Opportunity Myth. So thank you so much to Shannon and everybody at TNTP for having me here, giving me the opportunity to speak, and most importantly for listening to the thoughts and opinions of students every step of the way. So during my time on the panel this summer, one of the things we talked about the most was the purpose of school in general. You know, what is the purpose of an education? What is the point of going to school every day? And to be completely honest, I had never really thought about this before. Sure, I had thought about what I would change about school, and if I was made Secretary of Education for the day, what I would immediately do. But I had never really thought of the overriding purpose of school in general. So I kept thinking about it. And the more I thought about it, I realized that my entire life, I was told that the point of school was to get you to college. When I was in first grade, I remember we were in the between switching classes, and I raised my hand and I said to the teacher, you know, reading is great and like math is fun, but when are we gonna do what we're interested in? When are we gonna learn about the stuff that we like and what we find fun? You know, I like dance. When am I gonna learn about the history of dance? And she said to me, well, that's not the point of school. And I guess I looked a little confused, so she kept going and she said, the point of what we're doing here is so that you can do well in the rest of elementary school, which you need to do so that you can do well in middle school, which you need to do so that you can do well in high school, which you need to do so that you can get into college. And so from that moment on, it was clear to me that for the rest of my time in school, the next 11 years of my life, the point of it was to get into college. College was like the finish line. No one really talked about what happened once you crossed the finish line, or what happened when you got to college, what your college classes would be like, or anything even beyond that. You just had to get to this finish line, and every opportunity would be there for you. It was like an equation. Get good grades plus work hard equals college equals success. So in my school district, this resulted in students being stressed about college from a very, very early age. By fourth grade, I decided that I wanted to go to Duke because that was the team my family rooted for during NCAA basketball. And once in fourth grade math class, I literally started crying because I didn't understand a geometry concept. And I was so convinced that because I didn't understand this one concept in fourth grade, I wasn't going to be able to get into Duke. So my whole life, I was told that everything was about getting into college. The classes we took were based on what would boost your GPA and make your transcript look good, not because you found the class interesting or because it would help you develop as a person or a student. The message was sent that nothing really counted, nothing was really real until you turned 18. And when you're constantly having classes and schedules picked for you and pre-written assignments handed to you, there's little room for deeper engagement or student voice. And I was frustrated, and it wasn't just normal teen angst. I was frustrated because there was a world of topics and problems out there that were bigger than math sheets or book reports. I and everyone around me had interests that we wanted to study. We had ideas that we wanted to put into action. But in the battle between deeper learning and college prep work, deeper learning always lost out. And this wasn't because our teachers didn't want to talk about the topics that we were interested in, or they didn't believe that our ideas had value or merit. It was because we existed in a system that didn't. And these norms continued to communicate that nothing mattered unless it helped us get to that finish line. But what happened after you crossed that finish line? That was what nobody talked about. And what if you never got to the finish line? If hard work plus good grades equals college equals success, what happens if you do work hard and you do make good grades, but you're not able to attend college? Does that mean that you're a failure? If you don't go to college, if you don't get to that finish line that's been created already for us, regardless of what we're interested or what we want to do, does that mean that at 17 or 18 years old, you're already a failure? Young people are given a hard time. We're told that we're apathetic and we're lazy and we don't care. But if you're put in this system where someone's created your end goal for you and they're told that nothing matters unless you reach that, Wouldn't you kind of be too? So while I was reading The Opportunity Myth, I found myself nodding in agreement in pretty much everything that was written down. Suddenly, the unwritten rules of my school experience were written down and presented as fact, and that was empowering. But like Maggie in The Opportunity Myth, I and the majority of my high school classmates are white. I reached that finish line, but only because I had parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings who went through the process before me. I had parents who were able and willing to give me the necessary yet extraordinarily expensive resources it takes to navigate the process. I now work for Student Voice, which is a national student-run 501c3 organization, and we aim to activate student voices to improve and change the education system, because we know that students are the people most impacted by education policy, but are rarely asked their opinions on it. I talk to students across the country on a daily basis who have thoughts and ideas and opinions, and they want to put them into action. But as said in The Opportunity Myth, school is not honoring their aspirations or setting them up for success. But I have hope. I'm not here to start off the day on a depressing note that nothing can get better. Every day, I see students become more involved in civic participation. Young people are leading walkouts and movements and leveraging technology and social media to create a better world when those with power won't do so. There are students in Oregon who are writing a State of Schools report on the state of school climate in Oregon. Students in Kentucky testify before their state legislature on a regular basis about school funding in Kentucky, and they even wrote a book about college readiness from the student perspective. Then in Boston, there's the Boston Student Advisory Council, who fight for student representation in education decision-making spaces. And in North Carolina, another student-led nonprofit, Kinston Teens, uses servant leadership to foster positive community growth by offering youth programs and service opportunities to nearly 3,000 people. And this all started with people, high schoolers, who had an idea and put it into action. Everyone in this room and all of those students in the organizations I just mentioned know that education is so much more than just getting you into college. And as we see in The Opportunity Myth, when students are challenged and taken seriously, when teachers give them opportunities to collaborate and think deeply about issues and materials, education becomes a tool to change the world, not just what gets you into college. So I want to say thank you to everyone at TNTP for investing in this report and spending so many years on it, because they believe that students are capable of more than what we're currently tasked with. And thank you to everybody here for being able and willing to listen and empathize and let students tell you what we want and need from our education. And with that, I'd like to introduce the CEO of TNTP, Dan Weissman.
Thank you so much, Megan. Appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. That's nice, a lot of energy. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Dan Weisberg. I'm the CEO of TNTP. For those who don't know us, we are a national education nonprofit founded 21 years ago by teachers to end the injustice of education inequality by ensuring that all students have access every day in every class, every grade, every school, every subject, every community to great teachers and great teaching. We're here today to present and discuss the findings from our 6th national report, The Opportunity Myth, what students can show us about how school is letting them down and how to fix it. Before turning it over to our student panel, I'm going to take about 20-25 minutes and take you through our findings. So in The Opportunity Myth, we examine the quality of student academic experiences in school and the effect on their long-term success. We isolated the factors which affect those experiences and student achievement. And those of you who know our work know that this is a bit of a departure for us. In the past, we've examined important, significant, but pretty discrete operational challenges involving teachers. Teacher evaluation, teacher staffing, recruitment, teacher retention, teacher development. This time around, we looked at the record number of students who are graduating high school, enrolling in college, finding themselves unprepared, being shunted into remediation, and not reaching their goal of getting a college diploma. And we wanted to know why. We wanted to know why at a root level. at a classroom level, at a student level. And so this report, at the heart of it, are real students. Students like Megan, students like the students you'll hear on our student panel in a couple of minutes. It's about their aspirations, their hopes, their challenges, and how school sets them up or doesn't set them up to reach their goals. We all ask students to aim high. And as we'll see, they do. We ask them to come to school every day, do the work we assign, work diligently in school and at home, all with the promise that they will graduate high school on time, ready for college, and a productive career. We further promise that all students will have this opportunity, that if they just do what we ask, they will be on the path to success. Unfortunately, what we found in the course of doing this study is that that promise is a myth. Opportunity in our schools is a scarce resource, and it is not distributed equitably, in spite of the heroic efforts of millions of educators around the country doing their best, working incredibly hard to do their best for students. We found, as we'll talk about in a second, that students are holding up their end of the bargain. They're doing what we ask. They're doing the work that they're assigned. But in most cases, those of us responsible for systems are making choices which don't give them a real opportunity to succeed. Okay, the report. How did we do it? To conduct this study, we partnered with 5 school systems. 3 urban districts, 1 rural district, 1 charter management organization. We followed almost 4,000 students during the 2016-2017 school year. We gathered almost 5,000 assignments, almost 25,000 pieces of student work, which we analyzed to measure assignment quality. Our norm-trained observers conducted over 1,000 hours of full-period observations using standard tools to measure the quality of instruction. We surveyed our 250 teachers about their practices, their views, and their expectations for their students. Most importantly, we surveyed students in the moment, in class, in school, over 30,000 times in order to get insight into the daily experiences of students. Our school system partners also gave us unparalleled access to student grades, to test scores, to information on courses and course access, on policies. All that allowed us to measure the quality of student experiences and isolate the factors that affect those experiences, as well as student achievement. We didn't just ask students, though, about their experiences in class. We asked them about their education and their career goals. And what we found is that 94% of students aspire to college or college and beyond, across all demographic groups, all racial groups, all ethnic groups, all income groups. Kids are setting their goals high. And they have concrete career plans. Hajima wants to be a neurologist, but she doesn't just want to be a neurologist. I used to have a coach who said, a goal without a plan is just a dream. Well, kids are dreaming, but they're also planning. So Hajima transferred to a high school that specializes in medical careers, and she didn't just do that. She's taking every advanced math class that they offer. Raymond wants to be a police officer. Luce isn't sure exactly what she wants to be, but she really enjoys working with young children. She's thinking about teaching, which is great. Maggie wants to be a trauma nurse. Isaac wants to be an RN. Kids are aiming high and they're working hard to reach their goals. We found that 88% of the time, kids are doing what they're asked in class. And they're earning good grades. They're not just doing what they're asked, they're earning good grades. 80% of the time in our data set, kids are getting A's, B's, or C's, and most of the time they're getting A's and B's. We found that 4 key resources influence student experience and student achievement. And we use that term resource. Usually when we say the word resource in education, we're talking about one thing: money, dollars, greenbacks. These 4 resources turn out to be just as important to student experience and to student success. First, grade level assignments, meaning assignments that give students a chance to meet the demands of standards that are designed to put kids on path for success in college. Second, strong instruction, meaning instruction that asks students to do the majority of the thinking about grade level content, not, for example, to just copy down the answers. Third, deep engagement, meaning students find what they're working on in class to be interesting and enjoyable, and they're concentrating deeply on it. That we know, not just for kids, but for adults as well, is when we learn. Fourth, teachers with high expectations, meaning teachers who believe their students can meet the demands of standards and do grade level work. These four resources, as we'll talk about in a minute, are really important to the quality of student experience and to student achievement, but most kids don't get regular access to even one of these resources, much less all four, and that is especially true for students of color, students from low-income backgrounds, English language learners, and students with mild to moderate disabilities. Students are aiming high, they're working hard, they're doing what we're asking, but the choices we're making don't honor their aspirations. Remember, I mentioned a second ago that we analyzed almost 25,000 pieces of student work from across the country. Over 70% of the time, students met the demands of those assignments. Over 70% of the time. But students met grade level standards only 17% of the time on those exact same assignments. That 54% gap represents lots of assignments that simply don't give kids a chance to meet the demands of the standards, even if they get A+ on those assignments. Opportunity, once again, is a scarce resource in our schools, and it's not distributed equitably. And access to opportunity is not about student ability. It's about the choices that we are making at a system level. Students across all demographic groups in our data set can and do meet the bar when we give them a chance. If you look at the assignments in our data set that are actually on grade level, kids of color and white students succeeded with those assignments, those rigorous assignments, a majority of the time. There's a gap that exists between mastery of students of color versus white students, but it's not a substantial one. The much larger gap is the opportunity gap. In almost 40% of the classrooms where you had a majority of kids of color, while we were studying those classrooms during the course of the year, they didn't get one assignment. Not one that was at grade level. Not one chance to work on grade level assignments. The comparable statistic for majority white classrooms is 12%. Let's take a look at a couple of assignments from among the 5,000 that we collected to try to make this point. In one 8th grade classroom, in one of the districts we studied, students had a chance to read A Mighty Long Way, which is an 8th grade level text, and write an informational essay analyzing the ways in which the press affected the integration effort of Central High School in Little Rock. In another 8th grade classroom in the same district with a very similar student population, students read a 5th grade level text called Billion Oyster Project. Students then filled in vowels to complete the word habitat. This assignment is not aligned to 8th grade literacy standards or, in fact, any literacy standards at any grade level. Again, it isn't about student ability, it's about the choices we are making. We carefully studied how students spend their time in school. We found that students are spending nearly 3/4 of their time on work that isn't grade level, that doesn't give them an opportunity to get prepared to reach their goals. To be clear, we're not claiming that students should spend 100% of their time on grade level assignments. In our top quartile classrooms, about half of the assignments were at grade level. That leaves plenty of time for review, for remediation, for meeting kids where they are, for letting kids go at their own pace. The problem is, in our bottom quartile classrooms, in the same schools, only 13% of the assignments were on grade level. Only 13%. And as we'll see in a minute, that translates to months of lost learning for students who don't get the opportunities. We also measured the quality of instruction, as I mentioned a minute ago, including the extent to which students had a chance to do the thinking and the working that allowed them to develop the knowledge and the skills and the confidence that they will need at the next level. Our kids getting a chance to solve math problems, to do math problems, to grapple with them, or are they just copying down the answers from the board? We observed almost 900 full period lessons. Only a third used grade level content, and only 8% used grade level content and asked students to do the thinking about that content. And of course, we asked students about their experiences in school. Isaac told us that a lot of classes were really dry, that involved him just kind of sitting there and taking notes. Raymond thinks math is fun, which is great, but he spends a lot of his time in math class with his head on the desk because the students in Raymond's class don't get to do that much math. We found elementary students had engaging and worthwhile experiences 51% of the time, but that dropped in middle school to 31% of the time and dropped again in high school to 26% of the time. Let me say that again. Only a quarter of the time do high school students think that what their experience is engaging and worthwhile. More than that, 62% of the time, high school students didn't feel proud of what they were doing. Majority of the time, middle and high school kids didn't feel what they were doing was interesting or useful or enjoyable. 30 to 40% of the time, middle and high school kids didn't feel smart or successful. I think all of us would agree that we can do better and we have to do better. We should do better, that there's innate value in making experiences for kids more joyful, more engaging. But if we're able to do that, as we'll see in a minute, this also will result in student achievement, which will put more kids on track to meet their goals. We were privileged to get the insights from 250 teachers across the country. We learned about the challenges they have in accessing high-quality assignments for students. We also asked about their support for and knowledge of the standards, as well as their expectations for students. What we found is the overwhelming majority of teachers agreed with the standards. They agreed with the content of the standards. They thought the standards were right, 82%. But only 44% of those same teachers believed that their students could meet the demands of those standards. We also found that teachers of color had much higher expectations for students of color, about 30 percentage points higher. That tracks the results of other studies. This reflects systemic bias. If we, in this case, this was a classroom level study, but if we had studied expectations of administrators or school leaders or system leaders or nonprofit leaders, we would have found the same lowered expectations for students of color. We saw that students have a lot of trust, an overwhelming amount of trust in their teachers. 93% of students said their teachers think it's important, that they learn a lot. And everything that we observed out in the field reinforced that that trust students have for their teachers is well-founded. We saw dedicated, caring teachers doing their best for their students. And just as students are doing what we ask, teachers are doing what they're asked. They are doing their best to implement their training, to carry out the mandates they've gotten from administration, often under difficult conditions, without much training or support that, for example, would help them build their skill to help students who are behind succeed with grade level assignments. That's a complex and difficult skill, and we do a particularly terrible job of helping teachers to master it. As we say in the report also, let's not even think of adding more burdens on teachers who already have tremendous burdens if we're not willing to pay them a fair wage and we're not willing to give them the support that they are so hungry for. All right, so how did these factors show up in how kids did, how kids achieved in test scores? Well, it turns out that access to these 4 critical resources matter to student achievement quite a bit. We analyzed test scores and found that engaged students grew 2.5 months more in a single year. Students with teachers who believed they could succeed grew about 5 months more in a single year. Students with access to grade level assignments grew about 2 months more in a single year. We didn't see a lot of growth for students with stronger instruction, but we did see that students in classrooms with strong instruction were 31% more engaged, and as you see, engagement leads to higher student achievement. All of these effects were more powerful for students who start out the year substantially behind grade level. What we see is students who are behind are zooming ahead by 7.3 months when they get better assignments, by over 6 months when they get better instruction, by almost a month in a single year when they're more engaged, by almost 8 months in a single year when they have teachers who believe in their ability to succeed. All of this begs the question, if students who are behind benefit so much, achieve at such high levels when they get access to these critical resources, why are they least likely among all of our students to get access to these resources? Opportunities is scarce resource, as I said, and is not distributed equitably. Kids from low-income families, kids of color, systematically across all the systems that we study get far less access, regardless of their prior achievement. This is not about ability, it's about choices made at a systemic level. Kids of color, kids from low-income backgrounds were 25% less likely to receive grade-level assignments. Even high-achieving kids from low-income backgrounds and high-achieving kids of color got 30% less access to grade-level assignments than their peers. Not about ability, it's about choices that we are making. We also saw a racialized, two-tiered grading system where there was a lower bar for students of color. So that, for example, a student of color earning an A in an AP class, an advanced placement class, had the same chance of passing the AP test as a white student earning a C. This all adds up to us, to a system where we deny underserved students access to the 4 critical resources they need to succeed. We then often blame them and their families when they don't succeed, and then we cover up the inequity by telling them that they're fine, everything is fine, when we know that it is not. These are hard truths. I can see it on your faces. They're hard to hear. They're hard for us to hear because we know at TNTP we were part of perpetuating the opportunity myth. For example, for many years training teachers without giving them the training or appreciation for how critical it was for students to get access to grade-level assignments, without giving the teachers we were responsible for the appreciation for how critical it was that students have teachers with high expectations, regardless of their background, regardless of their prior achievement. But even though there's hard truths in here, there's also in this data, I would say, tremendous hope and a clear path forward. We had dozens of classrooms where kids were engaged 80% of the time. The charter management organization that we studied, 60% of the teachers consistently in all their schools we studied had high expectations. We had other schools where 80% of the teachers had high expectations for kids coming from underserved backgrounds. Kids who do get access to these critical resources, as we've seen, achieve at much higher levels. They cut gaps significantly, to the point where we saw gap cutting in 1 year where kids are getting these resources for kids who start out the year behind that is so substantial that if students were able to maintain those gains for 5 years, they would cut the gap with the state average entirely. Entirely. The same is true for students of color. So what should we do to eliminate the opportunity myth? It starts for us not with a detailed operational plan, although don't worry, we'll get there, but with 2 commitments, 2 big commitments that we think are important, we think have to be the bedrock for what we do. If superintendents, elected officials, educators, advocates, parents, support organizations, students pledge that these commitments will guide us, then we will begin to tear down the obstacles to education inequality, the obstacles to equity, the obstacles to excellence, that if we're really honest with ourselves over the last couple of decades, we've only been able to scratch the surface of. The first commitment involves recognizing that all students should have consistent access to engaging experiences, grade-level assignments, strong instruction, and high expectations every day, every school, every class. That will measure access to these resources. We'll own up to it where we're not providing them and work every day to do better, to provide more students with more opportunity. The second involves fundamentally changing the way we in school systems relate to students, parents, and communities. Typically, if we're honest, we hold them at arm's length. But in doing so, we are denying ourselves access to the greatest experts about our schools. So what we should do is bring parents, bring students in. Bring them in, give them seats at the table. Solicit information about their goals and their experiences and their ideas about how we can do better. Provide them with clear, accurate information about how students are doing against those goals, and continually seek their feedback. I'm going to come back and present our recommendations and a call to action, but first I am very excited to introduce our board chair, Luis Avila, who is going to moderate our student panel. I'm going to ask our students to come on up, and while Luis and students come up here, I will tell you that, and let's give them a nice welcoming hand. Luis, by the way, in addition to getting the short straw to have to manage me, is the president and founder of Iconico Campaigns, a company that works to build advocacy capacity in organizations around the country. Luis. Thank you. Thanks, Julie.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, I want to thank you all for being here this morning. I know you made it through the rain. And thank the students, too, for coming from different parts of the country to share their infinite wisdom with us. When I was 11 years old, from a corner in my room, I would hear my parents yell at each other. Sometimes it was because my father would arrive drunk and start a fight. Sometimes it was because my mother was desperate trying to find a way to cover our most basic necessities. I was actually a pretty good student in school. I would complete my assignments. I would do well on my grades. But when things started ramping up at home, I started disengaging in school. I put my head down, didn't pay attention, started actually pretending that I was sick, getting out of the classroom. And one day in recess, my teacher, Lupita, came to me. And she asked me what was going on. And she said something that to this day, I still remember in those moments when the imposter syndrome hits me. She said, "You are way brighter than you believe to be. You can do whatever you want in life. You just have to choose to do it." And she asked me what I wanted to do in the future. And for the first time, I felt seen at 11 years old. For the first time, I felt heard. She started giving me more homework, more challenging homework, and more challenging assignments in the classroom because she knew I could complete them. And she told me that her expectations were higher than those that I was meeting. From time to time, she would actually even call home and check on me. She reached out to my parents and told them what was going on, and they all took immediate action for me to get back on track. Reading The Opportunity Myth reminded me of that moment. Not because back then we had standards that we know now, but because expectations have always been around us, regardless of policy, regardless of law. I feel privileged and lucky today to hear from these amazing students that I had the chance of meeting this morning, and I please ask you to give them the biggest round of applause so we can get started. So earlier today, we were asking each other, how are we going to get started with this conversation? And I said, I hate when in panels, we know and we expect that everybody's going to go one and one and one and one, right? So what I told them is the first question, I want to hear all of you answer the question. But I'm going to actually ask this question to one of them, and then they're going to tell us who's next, okay? And then the next question after that, I'm just going to see who wants to answer it, and we'll go from there. So the first question I'm going to ask is if you can share your name. I'm going to start with you, Julie. And I'm going to ask you to share your name, where you're from, and what do you want to do after school? What are your desires and aspirations?
My name is Julie Hayducky. I'm a 9th grade student in Bridgeport. I attend Achievement First Amistad High School in New Haven, Connecticut, and I hope to be an education journalist.
Who do you want first? Who do you want to go next?
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kimberly Pham. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm a non-traditional student, so I attend Temple University part-time, studying social work. And my aspirations is for young people, young adults, to be valued, their experiences and knowledge, to be able to be a part of decision-making around decisions that truly impact them. So really shaping culture and the nonprofit, all different sectors, shaping culture and narrative.
Kimberly, before you pass the mic, what do you want to do?
Ooh. Yeah, I want to be a part of that process. So really influencing people's thinking is my job in that.
Okay, thank you, Kimberly.
Good morning. My name is Vasiki. I'm originally from New York City, Queens, and I'm a junior at Colby College studying physics. And I think my aspirations as of now is to become an engineer, and I'm hoping to work with underserved communities primarily.
Thank you.
Good morning, buenos dias. So my name is Martin. I'm from Long Beach, California. I'm a recent UCLA graduate. I just received my BA in political science with a minor in Chicano studies. And so I'm trying to continue in law. I hope to continue into law school, and I spoke to some of the people backstage, and I let them know that employment law is something that I'm interested in, but also educational law, just because, I mean, when I was reading this, I definitely saw a lot of what I thought was already known and true, and so I wish to continue doing this work and hopefully establish this. It's a lot of the work that was put in and make it known to a wider, greater audience, and hopefully enough people that we can actually make a substantial change. Yeah. Thank you,
Michael. Well, let's actually start with the big question about the actual information we are sharing today, right? Some of us were talking in the back about how we were reacting to it. Who would like to share about, like, what jumped at you? What seemed familiar about the report on your own academic experience? Anybody? You want to go first?
Yeah, I guess since I have the mic. I think for me, one thing that I really kept thinking about when I was reading over this was the fact that I kept thinking about my favorite teachers a lot. I kept thinking about Mr. Stanley, my 3rd grade teacher, Miss Alcala, my 5th grade teacher. And I just kept thinking about how they kept pushing me forward. And I didn't realize why. But as I kept reading this, I think they saw a little bit of themselves in me. And so I think for me, that was my biggest reaction was, why is it that I only had a couple educators instead of having my entire life spent, now that I've reached, this finish line, how is it that I only had a couple shining moments instead of, an entire educational career where I had people that stood out in so many different ways? I had a couple shining bright moments, and I think for me, my reaction was, well, I thought a lot of this was already known. Why is it that I could only remember 2 instances where I felt that support? So for me, and my reaction to this report was, this isn't known, this isn't widespread information, and I really want to make sure that continues to continue out into the places that this information needs to be getting to.
Great. Vasiki, would you like to?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think what stood out to me the most while reading the report and that I could really resonate with was the dichotomy and like the performance between students of color and white students at schools across the country, and how that intersected with teachers' expectations of those students. And I know it really resonated with my experience thinking about as a black student, what teachers expected of me, or what they didn't expect of me versus what they expected of my peers who were of other racial backgrounds, and the kind of stereotypes they kind of put on me, and how that affected my performance in school.
Julie, I would love to hear, you're in 9th grade right now. Share a little bit about what from the report feels real and close to you right now.
When I first read this report, I thought about my experience at Achievement First. Right now, 100% of students in my high school are accepted into a four-year college or university. How many of them are prepared? We don't know. When I go to school every day, I wonder, though 100% of us are accepted, this gap continues to show itself in the classroom. So far this year, 3 of my teachers have left. So when teacher turnover is that real throughout my school, I don't know how that's influencing my academic career, even though this data, I'm experiencing this data.
Thank you, Julie. Kimberly, we were talking earlier about non-traditional students, as you were referring, and I would love to hear, what role amazing teachers play in making sure that we continue our education, right?
Wow, the role is critical, as educators know, because students spend a lot of time in school. That's half of our life. That's our 9 to 5 when we're younger. And it's a vital role that that teacher plays, and I know it's exhausting. I remember being the kid that you want on your hip, and I remember being the kid that gets sent to the accommodation room. And it can be different feelings and, different responsibilities that educators have to deal with, but their role is so vital and critical. Like I said, it's a second home for some folks. But most importantly, it's still like a job for a young person. We spend about 8 hours in school. That's a lot of time. Then you go home, you kind of had dinner, and then it's like back to school again, And seeing that teacher every day, having high expectations, I think that's the closest I've felt to school, really understanding what does school all really mean. That teacher really helps bring that understanding for me as a young person. So, I just want to let all educators know, regardless if you're not directly in the classroom with that young person, whether if you're a district supervisor, a principal, everyone in that brick and mortar setting plays a critical role to the young person and how they feel about coming to school. If I feel like my teachers don't care, then 9 times out of 10, I'm going to start not really wanting to care about this place either. Especially when we parents and families set the bar high for school. You need to get there on time. This is where you're going to learn a lot about, life and stuff like that. So that connection, it doesn't need to, there doesn't need to be a disconnect with what kind of gets said at home with families and parents about that high expectation in school and what's the outcome, when you kind of put all your efforts into it. So educators just have a vital role.
Kimberly, do you remember a particular educator that made a big impact, positive or more of a challenging impact in your experience in school?
Like I share, all my teachers did. I always try to make a learning lesson out of everything. I was a mentally gifted student, so I kind of seen that trajectory of being advanced. Having those divided expectations for young people living in a low-income community, being Asian and Latinx in a Black and brown community, the realities is real. You kind of see the raw facts, that you kind of set the standards low for some people, and you don't want it to be transparent and say it's a race issue or whatever, but clearly there's not equitable education. The field is not even out for people. I noticed that being a mentally gifted student, going outside of the classroom, then coming back inside of the classroom, why am I not really feeling like I'm learning here? Why am I being much challenged here? Why are these students even feeling like they're, I don't even know how they're feeling like they're gonna go somewhere when they don't know that their learning, their quality of learning is low, And then outside of that, you have these kids that are looked upon as nerds or the smart ones, when honestly, school, we should have an even playing field. If you have some people who want to overachieve, make room for those people. But at the end of the day, we should all know what we need to know to get through life.
Yes, thank you. Now, we heard a lot about assignments, right? And how we are not, as students, receiving challenging assignments, right? Do you remember assignments or experiences in the classroom that were challenging and exciting from any moment in your academic career, in your academic experience? All of you shaking your heads? Go for it.
I would definitely say, like, in high school, my first year, the ninth grade English teacher I had was extremely challenging, and like a lot of students felt a lot of different ways about that. The fact that she challenged students and pushed students, like she made us read a lot of different types of books that you may not have expected ninth graders to read. Like I remember we read Fallen Angels by, I believe his name is Walter Dean Myers, and that was an amazing book. And then she had us like write an extended ending to the original novel. So basically, she was teaching us how to like kind of create like an extended story with a overarching plot line, and just kind of go into details and like make us become better writers. And this was ninth grade, and she was like, "Yeah, like you have a minimum of like 15 pages, so get to it." And and I remember like at first I was scared, but then when I started writing, like I got like, super into it and super excited about it. And like I think it was at that point that like I got more into like just writing and creative writing in general. And like I think her challenging me and like just the class in that way, I think just kind of prepared me in a way that was very beneficial, like moving forward through my academic career.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You were shaking your head, Martin, earlier. What assignments do you remember were challenging, but in a good way?
Yeah, so for me, in high school, my sophomore year, I had this teacher, Miss Vitale. And so she was my English teacher, and for all of our readings, we had to write extended works, and it was just long essays, really reflective essays. She really wanted us to think about what we were reading, why we were reading it, what we were supposed to learn from it and gain from it, so that we could have full-blown conversations about it in class. But every time that we had to write an essay, I just remember my papers looking as if someone had just laid a steak on top of it, because there was just so much red. And that's not necessarily in the bad way, because ultimately, like, we still got the good grades, but she made me work for every single mistake that I had. She made me work to fix it the next time, and then the next time, and I mean, eventually I ended up with the white paper, but I mean, if it hadn't started off like someone had just laid a steak on top of it as butcher paper really quickly, I don't think it would have ever gotten there. So I think, I mean, even being told that I was wrong was good, because it meant I had to get better, and so it was a good thing for me, at least. It was challenging, but it was good to finally get that read off sometime. Yeah.
Julie, what are your favorite assignments? What are the ones you enjoy the most?
I enjoy my writing classes in school because I get the opportunity to go above and beyond the expectation and further myself as a writer. And I appreciate the teachers that I've had who have helped me do so. And I appreciate the teachers who have helped me do so and consistently pushed me to go above and beyond. Right now in my writing class, that's not necessarily happening. So I think it's important that we have teachers who support those who want to go above and beyond, so we can do even better and further our own personal growth beyond the curriculum.
I'm going to ask a question, and anybody can answer it. You can start, Julie, because you have the microphone. But do you feel listened to in school? Do you feel like your voice is heard in school? Your desires, your expectations as well?
In school, teachers listen. I can say on a case-by-case basis that teachers do listen to us. However, that's not necessarily changing anything. If I speak to a teacher about a problem in the school, that's not necessarily going to change that issue or even make it to the principal. So I feel like when we're speaking to our students, we need to value their voices to the point where we can create action within our schools to develop a better climate for our students.
Thank you. Anybody else feels like you were listened to in school, your voice mattered, in things that were individual, personal, or in the school setting overall?
In the context of high school, I personally feel like student voices weren't entirely heard. I feel like my high school, because it was a public high school that was under the New York City Department of Education, like there were just a lot of rigid rules and policies that were followed. So a lot of times, like the students had concerns about certain things, like they weren't necessarily addressed. But I will say that after a certain point, I think the school kind of reacted. So for instance, like starting off my first year at the high school I went to, which was Queens Vocational, now known as Queens Tech, like there were very little AP classes, and as we progressed through our 4 years, like I know a lot of people within like my graduating class were like, they were yearning for like an AP class. They wanted like a more academic challenge, and like they kind of pushed for it. And eventually, by our senior year, like they implemented like 3 or 4 AP classes. So it was pretty late into our academic career at the high school, but we didn't have, but it was still an opportunity nonetheless. So I think in that sense that the school did listen, but overall, I do think our voices are usually went unheard and ignored.
Kimberly, what about your experience? We were talking about earlier how important it is for non-traditional students to have a voice and be heard and be participating in their own education. What do you have to say about that?
There's so much to say, Louise.
Please do.
To be honest, I don't feel like I was heard in school. You know, growing up in a low-income community, you just kind of go to school, show up, and it's the same vibe with the teacher. They just kind of come there, show up, do their job. Student voice is valued, but I don't think it's like shown the way it needs to be like displayed, you know. You kind of put it in a department, like we're gonna create a student voice council and they'll speak to these issues, versus like how teachers kind of link up in the back and they all have real conversations. And I think that's where, you know, it needs to be for young people and their voices, like there needs to be real conversations with all stakeholders, and not just it be like, oh yeah, students link up and you guys just talk about it and then bring it back to the adults. It needs to be intergenerational, yeah, with all different roles, not just, like I said, not just the educators, but also other people who may be in the building supporting that student as well, whether that's like the lunch lady, the security guard or whatever, yeah, like student voice is value, but it needs to be displayed in different ways and not just saying, hey, we have a student voice council and that's, you know, the go-to people to represent student voice. You know, there needs to be a change in culture, like a day where we're linking up and we having groups, you know, like where we all checking in the whole time in school saying either we 100% feeling like we 50%, you know, like a monthly check-in. There's like I shared with you, honestly, that's how I'm viewing student voice right now in the game. Like it's there, but it could be better.
I'm gonna go with you again. About the conversation we're having, something that Martin said is like this information needs to be known, right? Even though I felt it, it wasn't written, right? What gives you hope about where we are today, right? Looking at the education system, looking at your own education, you know, this conversation, what gives you hope about the future of education?
What gives me hope is this report, because there was inclusive of actually wanting to not just focus on the quantitative data, but also the qualitative part. Following students, kind of seeing what they're seeing day to day, right? And thinking about, like, putting yourself back in a person's shoes, right? And really seeing, like, damn, well, am I really getting challenged by this work? You know, and if I came from this specific community, do these assignments differ than this zip code over here and things like that? Yeah, that gives me hope, like finding that data, not just focusing on the quantitative, but that qualitative part. Also, just being real, you know, with the 4 resources that we need to improve on, they're not missing. You know, when I think about high expectations, like you shared earlier, starting the conversation of, that's the thing that resonated for me, our level of thinking for people. You know, if we're educators and we're teachers and we're in control of that classroom, we may not have a lot to work with, but we're gonna work with what we got, and we're gonna be advocates. You know, because it's one thing to say, I have high expectations of a student, but I don't have the resources to get you where you need to go. And us as teachers or educators have to be real and advocate to the next one up who's able to get those resources, whether that's your principal, your superintendent. You have to let people know about the challenges, and folks who are in control of making a difference or making impact, creating that impact, should know about it as well. You know, it should not be something like, I should be talking to the student like, I really do have high expectations for you, but this school doesn't have what you need. And we do, you know, sometimes we gotta work with what we got, but we have to also ask for more and not be afraid to ask and advocate on the behalf of our young people, because that's the power we have in that space of education. So ensuring that educators are feeling powerful regardless, and I know, like I said, it's hard. It is hard. I just came from my own city. We just regained local control. It's been 16 years. And that process wasn't pretty and liked well by the city, but also introduced me to different dynamics of power and influence we can have and control. If we just speak more and build on that listening. If you heard Julie, yeah, people are listening. I think really people may be hearing you. Because the saying is I hear you, but when you listen, there's impact out of that. Your behavior may change. The way your perspective about a student may change. You might start to respect them more. So that's just my comments there.
Thank you. Martin, we're gonna go with your hopes, with where we are, right? This is a difficult conversation and one that it's a big monster of a challenge, right?
No, definitely. But I think I have hope for two reasons. As Kimberly mentioned, this report, honestly for me, as I was saying, I thought a lot of this was common knowledge, or me, I was like, oh, it's happening to me, so why doesn't everyone else see it? So to me, this is the shadow that had been looming has actually manifested itself, is actually present. It's here, it's written, it's on paper, so if you don't believe me, there it is. But not only that, we're also talking about how students have faith and trust in their teachers. And I think that once we start to focus on educators and make sure that they are supported and they have the resources to continue to work on this achievement gap properly, thinking critically, it's hard. As Dan mentioned, when we continue to push this forward and have to critically think and reflect, that means that we have to overhaul what we're doing. And I think that having this written and this presented now means that we can properly, critically do that work and make sure that the children continue to have hope. Because as I was reading this, I just kept thinking of the kids that don't have that voice in policy, cannot stand in a Senate or whatever it might be, or a school board meeting, or even talk to their own teachers. Those are still voices that need to be heard. And so for me, the report does part of that. And then knowing that the children still have trust in their teachers, faith in their teachers, means that they're gonna continue to do this work along the way as changes do come. So that's my choice.
Julie, I want to ask you the same question, but you told me you wanted to write about education in the future, right? Mm-hmm. What are you hoping to write about in the future? When you think about the future, what are you hoping to write about? Same stuff that we are talking about today, or different stuff?
I hope that when I start my career, this change will begin to happen. I'll be able to grasp student perspectives from around the country because we'll be starting to make the change. Another thing that gives me hope is the amount of teachers running for office. Whether it's local city council elections, Congress, this is where change begins. They're creating systemic change, but I know a lot of teachers are here and we all care about our students. This change begins in the classroom.
Thank you so much. Ezequiel, I want to ask you a question. Earlier, Dan was sharing this information about how students of color we have different expectations of students of color, and you were saying this was something I lived, right? And this is not something that a report would fix, right? It's a challenging historical conversation we've been having in this country. What gives you hope about the future?
I think what gives me hope, kind of like what we're talking about, these are conversations that are happening, I know these are conversations that I've had with my own friends and other peers, and this report kind of materializes the problems that exist. And I think with the existence of this report and just the knowledge being spread out, it makes students realize that the problems they're facing in school is not something that they need to internalize and think, oh, this is a me problem, I'm unable to succeed, but rather recognize that this is a systematic problem that needs to be like addressed and fixed. And I think once students are able to feel comfortable, like no longer internalize it, they'll feel more comfortable like voicing themselves and recognizing that they have like kind of give themselves confidence in saying, okay, like this is what's wrong with my education system and it needs to be fixed, you know, and just feeling confident in voicing themselves and letting people around them know that this is an issue that needs to be addressed immediately.
What's the most difficult part of that, Basiki? What is the most difficult part, the most tense and difficult?
Personally, I feel like the most difficult part would have to be the repetition and the energy that it takes up, because I'm imagining like if I'm like in the 10th grade and like I recognize that there's a problem that exists here and I want to address it, but then I move on to the 11th grade and it just kind of rematerializes just through like a different environment. And I think that kind of like that in a way may make students feel like there's no way out of like that loop of difficulty and like negative challenge. So I would definitely say like that's the most difficult part of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Last thing, we're going to wrap up. So we have a couple of minutes left, but I want to ask, sometimes in these conversations we have a set of questions we want to ask and the discussion that we have. Sometimes we miss things, right? What do you think we're not talking about that we should be talking about as part of this conversation, a part of the report and the opportunity myth?
So for me, I think something that could be focused on a little bit more is sometimes the implicit bias that does happen. It's a subconscious taking effect there. So what we need to do is actively think about what we need to change instead of just continuing through what's going on. And I think that could be alleviated a little bit by supporting teachers properly and making sure that they know that they're being recognized for the work that they're doing, properly supported with resources. Money talks, and so when we pay teachers what they should be paid, educators what they should be paid, I think that's gonna lead into a big change.
Great. Kimberly, Julie, what do you think?
I think that we need to address mental health in our schools. Students are experiencing so many things outside of the classroom, and yes, instruction, etc., definitely impacts student achievement. There are things happening beyond the walls of the classroom that are also systemic issues that are not as easy to fix. So I think we need more social workers to begin with in our schools to better support our students on the track to their academic success.
Thank you. Kimberly?
I don't think it may be missing, but just to kind of look at these moments as life-changing. I guess, yeah, the whole thing of education, that it's life-changing opportunities, and that everyone is playing a vital role in that, and stop looking at it as just like, it's just a job. Like you're literally going to have impact on someone's life, and potentially what they will be in life, you know? So just starting to kind of manifest that type of narrative around, you know, teachers helping and creating that life-changing moment for that young person. So we can start to probably put more resources into humans, because this is our only free public benefit, I guess, as a citizen of America. So we need to show more value in it. I'm gonna say that out loud, but yeah, I'm gonna definitely be real on that. But yeah, just reminding folks like this is a life-changing moment or moments that happen throughout K to 12, post-secondary, whatever, you know. What you say, what you do, how you treat someone, it plays a role for me, you know, and it's nothing more, I think, caring than seeing someone choose an occupation that comes with a lot of stress, and they know it, you know. So just want to respect everyone who chooses education as this field, because it's not easy, and we seem undervalued at times, but we still push through. And just reminding people, like, you know, you are there with someone and you could potentially change someone's life and the way that they're thinking about, you know, school, whether if it's dropping out, not wanting to come tomorrow because, you know, I can't deal with this assignment. But
Basiki, take us home.
Yeah. I definitely want to second Julie on the mental health aspect, and I do think that one thing that can be changed is having more educators of color in the classroom, because I'm a firm believer in this idea that like students of color sitting in the classroom, like if they're being taught by someone that looks like them, that may come from a similar background as them, it does truly impact or plays a part in like how they perform in the classroom, how comfortable they feel with the instructor that's standing in front of them, and just overall like how they navigate through like their academic career. Like I think that's a really big impact, and I think like that's one thing to kind of strive for. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for your infinite wisdom, as I said earlier. And I want to thank you for opening up and being so candid and sharing all this amazing. What gives me hope, it's the social worker, the engineer, the writer, the attorney that you're all going to become and help us change this society for better. Thank you so much.
Can we give one more round of applause for So each of these students are clearly amazing individuals. I just want to tell you that this is what we got from thousands of students. These are remarkable people that you just heard from, but there are so many more where they came from in their schools. If we just open up our ears, open up our eyes, give them a seat at the table, what you get is what you heard. Nuanced, sophisticated, practical, honest input. So if nothing else comes, if it creates more opportunities for students to be heard, then I think we'll have all done something positive. So thank you again for that. Now I'd like to introduce Martine, you've already met, Martine Martinez Saldana, who will facilitate our second conversation, which will be between students and educators. I ask my panelists to come on up. Thank you. Martine.
Thank you. Hello. Good morning. Welcome. Hey, how's it going? Hey. So I think for me, I'd like to open up this conversation by saying that now that I've reached this finish line, I've gone to college, I think this is the first time that I've actually sat down with educators. So I'd like to thank you all for coming out here. But I want to also highlight the students, because this is going to be their time to actually get this time to talk. And I think that's opening this platform, having this stage is what's going to be extremely critical, because these two voices need to continue being in conversation. Because I think what this report does more than anything else is show that when these two voices do come together efficiently and effectively, there's actually going to be some change, some progress. And I think more than ever, or I think this is going to be the next step that needs to be taken, especially during the times that we're going now with this achievement gap. It's showing that it's substantial. The numbers are there, and it's time. I mean, we had that, if only 5 years, it would take 5 years to close this gap. So to have this conversation now rather than later, that's going to be what's going to end up closing this gap. So what I'm going to have everyone do is just quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll start the questioning. So do you want to go ahead and start?
Hi, my name is Justin Thatch. I'm a senior at West Salem High School in Salem, Oregon, and I am also the communications coordinator for Oregon Student Voice. Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm Megan. I'm a sophomore at Barnard College studying political science, and I'm the director of strategic planning for Student Voice.
Hi, I am Sonia Brookins Santelises, and I'm the CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools.
Hi, my name is Marvin Pierre. I serve as the executive director of a nonprofit called 8 Million Stories. We're based in Houston, Texas. We work to disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline by working with previously incarcerated youth 16 to 18.
My name is Joshua Martinez. I am a 4th grade teacher at Kip Raíces Academy in East Los Angeles.
Perfect. So I think I also want to go ahead and start by asking the 2 students their reactions about the report. And their initial reactions, their sentiments, and how they feel that they can continue this conversation with educators.
I thought it was a great report. I agreed with pretty much everything that the report said. And I think what I appreciated the most was the fact that students were at the forefront, and it was the student experiences and their opinions that were driving the report. And it was the data that was both quantitative and qualitative that was backing up their experiences.
Personally, having moved from New Jersey to Oregon just this past year, I noticed a really stark disparity in terms of the education systems that I experienced in these 2 places. And one of the things that really stood out to me within the research report was this statistic that 26% of all students had access to grade level materials. And I know that we covered that before, but I just want to let that sink in again. And maybe translate that to 74% of students didn't have access to these materials. That's almost 3/4. And so really thinking about the findings of this report and thinking about the regional disparities and socioeconomic disparities and all these different kinds of differences that we see in education systems around the nation, I really think that looking at the ways that we can close these gaps is really important. And so I'm excited to be here today to talk about that.
Perfect. Okay, so this question goes out to our educators and then other, our members working with our youth. How do these findings impact the role that you're going to continue to have from here on forward? Or how do these findings continue to support the work that you're already commenced and are doing now?
I feel extremely fortunate to be working at a school that has these things at the forefront of the student experience, and we gather a lot of information from what parents in the community needs, and so our kids just love being at school, and so we see this on a daily basis, that if you do have high expectations for kids and you do have challenging curriculum, kids love learning. And so to be a part of an organization and a part of a school that does that on a daily basis, it feels good. And so, I won the Fishman Prize through TNTP a couple years ago, and there was some guilt in that, because I was my success is so much of my success was built on the great work that was happening in kinder and first and second, and so I got the results of that great work, and so I see this on a daily basis, and it really is empowering for kids and their families.
Thank you.
So I think for me, what was wonderful about the report was it quantified and qualified what in some respect we should already know as educators, but somehow continue to find elusive, particularly when we get to levels and questions of scale. And so sitting across Baltimore City, so number one, I was thrilled when today came, because now I could officially begin sending out the embargoed report to everybody. And so that was, already on the ride here, I was like, copying the examples, sending them to, this and this. But I do think, as some of the young people have said, it is about continuing to keep at the forefront what is the student experience. And what was interesting for me was the parallel between student experiences and teacher experiences, right? So young people not feeling like they had the relationships and the support and the resources, and hearing from teachers who also felt like they didn't have the relationships with folks who sit in central office like I do, and the supports. And I think what it really did for me as a systems leader was really put to the forefront that this question of scale really has to confront what are the systemic decisions that we make that create the conditions across schools, right? So decisions about for example, curriculum, right? And we had to have a real hard conversation in Baltimore City with teachers, actually, as well as Central. One, at Central, we had to face up to the fact that we were not supporting frontline people in the field doing the work every day in a way that they felt that they could be successful, trying to create the kind of rigorous experiences that young people want. And so we had to make a decision to go with a curriculum that seemed more rigorous. At the same time, we had to hear, and I kept hearing from young people, particularly in Baltimore City, where like a lot of urban areas, the crucible, the public school system is the crucible of all of the historical challenges, all of the systemic racism, all of the lack of what I call compounded disinvestment, right? And so at some point, how do we make that explicit? And it was from young people living it, who were like, if you want this to be relevant to us, then we're gonna have to be more direct in what those connections are to the academic experience. So for me, I had a lot of things going on, but that beauty of having it be central and hearing young people talk about the fact that these things are living with them now means that it's the urgent work and it's the work we have to do, but it is a work of scale.
I think for me, one of the things that I was really excited to see in the report was this idea around high expectations. And so for me, in my work at 8 Million Stories, in Houston, we send almost 12,000 kids a year to the juvenile justice system between 10 to 18 years of age. And what's concerning is that once those kids come in contact with the juvenile system, there's so many barriers to reentry into their traditional schools. These young people often end up back in the system within 3 months. And so when we started this program, one of the key core values for us was to set high expectations. And prior to starting 8 Million Stories, I was an educational school leader, and oftentimes we would set these bars of high expectations, but no resources to help kids meet them. And so one of the things that I did not want to do is become that same kind of school setting where we're talking the good talk, but we're not really giving the kids the ability to dream past what they see in their communities every day. And so in 8 Million Stories, all of my kids have been pretty much pushed out of all of the schools in the city of Houston. So no school will take them back because of their past behaviors. And so, you know, one of the things, each kid comes in and they interview with me or my program manager, and one of the things that we tell them, we say, you're either gonna go to college after you get a GED through this program, or you're gonna go to a trade school. And some of our kids look at us like, what are you talking about, college? Like, I just took your assessment and I scored on a 4th grade reading level, and I'm 16, 17 years of age. College is not for me. It is for you. And so when I was reading that, something really hit home for me because in our first year, January of 2017 was our first year. We served 83 kids in our program that year, and 37% of them graduated with a high school equivalency diploma. And what was concerning was, out of that group that graduated, we had one young man that is now a college resident as of Sunday. And so we moved him into college. And prior to that, this kid was a drug dealer and stealing cars. And on our road to Dallas, he's now at Tyler Junior Community College, started his first day of classes yesterday. And he said, wow, Mr. Pierre, like the last time I was making this trip towards Dallas, I was in a stolen car. And now I'm going as a college student. And that wouldn't happen with low expectations. And so I say that to say is that many people think that the work that we're doing is wasted energy because some of those kids are so far behind that it's really not worth the investment to really give these kids a fighting chance to be successful in life. And so every time I read about this high expectations, I think about Donovan and the other kids that we made had come through our program and have been successful as a result of our expectations and our mindset that we're gonna do whatever it takes to ensure that they become successful.
Perfect, that sounds great. I kind of want to transfer this over back to the students and say, both of you are student leaders. How do you continue to do this work from the bottom up? You know, from the student perspective, how is it that you continue to want to make teachers really continue to push the high expectations, make sure that they continue that into the classroom? What is it that you two would like to see from educators in the future?
Definitely having had the experience seeing on one end of the spectrum what high expectations can do for someone in pushing them from a very young age, providing them with resources that they might not necessarily be able to find at home. And then on the other side, seeing what lower expectations can do in kind of the mindset that it develops, whether or not it comes before or after the high expectations. Seeing that gives me hope that I know that these high expectations can exist on a wider scale in the future. And I think that in terms of youth civic engagement, social impact, and all those things, seeing the other people that have been able to glean a very good experience from their education and to be able to put that into use, whether it's in social activism, whether it's in public policy, political activism, all these kinds of things, seeing how they're able to use their education to impact society on a larger scale, that's what really drives me forward in this work.
Perfect.
So when I was a sophomore in high school, my family moved from Connecticut to South Carolina, and I finished high school in South Carolina. And there were a lot of culture shocks there for a lot of different reasons, but one of the biggest differences I felt in my new school was that teachers were invested in not just us when we were in school, but us as a whole person. And one of the best ways that they, practiced what they preached and backed this up was they were constantly connecting us with opportunities outside of school of things that we were interested in. Or if we were out there finding our own opportunities, they were constantly checking in with us, showcasing us, giving us credit, making us feel as though they acknowledged what we were doing and that they appreciated what we were doing. Our teachers brought us to, I remember I went to an education conference my senior year of high school because one of my teachers said, I know you're interested in education policy, like, I'll drive you there, let's go. And so having opportunities like that, they were constantly showing that they were interested and invested in not only how we did in school, but us as a whole self, and were telling us that our extracurriculars weren't just extracurriculars, that's what we were passionate about, and that's what was gonna carry us into college and beyond. So that would be my recommendation. That truly changed my life, the teachers that I had in my time in South Carolina and the opportunities they gave me. And I continue to do this work because I know that students are capable of it, but also because teachers are going so far out of their way to have give students these opportunities. And that's something I would recommend for everybody, is to constantly be looking for ways that your students can improve and grow as people, even outside of the classroom.
Perfect. I'm going to pass this question on to Joshua. Do any of the findings in the report seem to shock you? And as an educator, you're in the classroom every day. Was there anything that you still read that was shocking nonetheless, outside of maybe your own classroom, but that you thought might have been commonplace?
No, it wasn't shocking. I agreed with the student panel that it definitely was not shocking. I think that student voice is definitely something that has not been valued and listened to. And so the fact that TNTP did so much research on this I think is highly important. It's because it gives it the backbone for it's not just students complaining in the classroom. Like, this is actual reality in the classroom. And so, yeah, there was not a whole lot of shocking information here. I mean, what it does for me as an educator is it puts a lot of focus back on me on what am I going to do, with, like, how am I going to continue to value student voice in my classroom, and how am I going to get, for 9 and 10-year-olds, what does that look like for 9 and 10-year-olds? What does that look like for, 5 and 6-year-olds to value student voice? And so they feel like they have that capacity to speak up about the things that they need, and also when things get particularly challenging, right? So talking about curriculum and talking about deep levels of engagement and high expectations, like, those things are relatively tricky if students feel like they don't have the skills to be able to do those things, right? And school can become just hard, right? And so how do you balance both emotional resiliency to, like, do these tough tasks while also giving them the tools and skills that they need in order to be successful? I mean, not just for the purpose of college, but just for life in general, living a good life. And so all of these things in the report are making me self-reflect on what am I going to continue to do to raise student capacity, right, for not only voice but also for resiliency.
Perfect. I'm going to pass this one on to Dr. Santelices. You mentioned as a system leader, this report legitimizes a lot of the work that you've been doing already. How do you continue to push this forward with this report in mind into the Boston City's public schools? Or Baltimore, my apologies.
That's okay, I was in Boston too. you get a pass. I mean, there was just a whole lot, and so part of me is still unpacking. I will say, when Dan put the slide up about how we could eradicate what we have now come to call this gap, in 5 years was, again, not startling new information, but the positing of that in that way made it tangible and portable, right? So in 5 years, not 5 generations, not 5 decades, right? In 5 years, if we were to focus with a laser-like intensity on these 4 major resources, which, by the way, as somebody who has spent at least 70% of my time the last 2 years advocating for actual cash on the table in the unequal distribution of resources for young people, what was actually encouraging was that those 4 resources, while they are made easier with money, they don't all require money. And so if you look at, right, if you look at some of like Vanessa Siddle Walker's work, like I said, that was my like book for the summer, right? The education of Howard Tate, I think it is. What she describes what is an African-American community in the Deep South with a direct, violent, kind of hegemonic attack, but figured out how to give its young people the kind of nurture of high expectations, right? The actual access to as much of rigor as they could muster within that environment. And my dad is always quick to tell me that actually there were more African-American PhDs proportionate to African-American graduates from college 3 decades ago than there are now. So this piece about what those 4 resources represent will not take me away from still going to the State House and saying you have systematically underinvested in communities of color for 4 generations, right? But what it says when I kind of go back home is there are things we can do now, that expectations actually don't cost anything, right? Expectations cost your idea of yourself. And if we go back, and not to do a little history lesson, but like again, I've been murking around in this. Like I sat with a junior at one of our higher performing high schools, an African-American young girl who had convinced herself, even with the recommendation of her teacher, to take AP Lang in junior year. She had kind of systematically unwound in her own head her inability to do that. And I sat with her, and one of the things I said to her is, do you understand that part of this unraveling is because the justification for where you are right now that you have pushed through was a direct, explicit belief that the mind of an African American was not capable of complex thought. It was part of the push, right, to justify desegregation. And what was interesting was I gave her this little mini lesson, and she's sitting there, and I said, so that's part of why you feel what you feel, is you are pushing against something that was explicitly set out and systematically input in a system. And even me, as a leader of color in this system, have to continually fight that way. And I watched her eyes open, and I watched her have a validation of what she was experiencing. I'm not crazy, right? I'm not off. I don't need to just work harder. But somebody has now given me permission to name the lack of expectation that I've experienced for a long time. I said, so now let's just both agree that this is there, it's gonna be there, but we're not gonna let that keep you from doing this work. And yes, it's gonna be hard. And yeah, you waited 2 weeks because you questioned yourself, so you're gonna have to work hard for 2 weeks. Because that AP Lang class got their summer reading 3 months ago. So let's have a real discussion about what that is. But I think there is this combination. We say high expectations, but we're not explicitly unraveling and validating, right? You have to be a junior at Colby to sit on a stage and be able to say in front of a group of people, I have experienced systematic exclusion based on race, And this is how it has made me feel, and this is what I've had to fight. And so the validation of that, whatever the other isms are, and there are many, I think is part of this. And so that's the piece I don't want to gloss over. Because if we just make it, let's put some hard content, and we are not helping young people emotionally and intellectually navigate and name what that is, then we can put all the rough content out there all we want. I am telling you, we will leave large pockets of young people behind.
For Megan, so we have here educators that truly believe in supporting students, but as a student who's trying to enact change, could you please tell us about a time where you had pushback, people not willing to help you, trying to elevate student voices in the work that you're trying to do? Yeah, could you just tell us about a time that you experienced that?
There's so many. Also, I don't really want to follow that, but so I think one of the biggest problems is that there's very few institutional ways for student voices to be heard authentically. I would say most schools in the country have student councils, but what's the responsibility that they are tasked with? We plan prom, homecoming, maybe we pick themes. That might be the limit to that. But so we're being told in those kind of spaces that yes, you have a voice, you matter, you were elected by your peers, but you only have so much of a voice. There's only so much we'll let you do. One example I can think of is I was working with a school. We wanted to come in and student voice. We do a lot of roundtables, and we come in and we facilitate them. We talk to students, try to get their authentic feelings. One of the first questions we always ask is, what is something that happens in your school that your teachers and in your administrators don't know about? And it always kind of catches the chaperone or whoever was in there off guard. And it's great because it's candid and it's authentic, and that's what student voice really looks like. And we were doing these for a while, and we did a national tour of these roundtables, and it got a little bit of buzz. And so then I joined the organization, and I tried to go to a school in South Carolina to do a roundtable, and they kind of knew what we were going to be doing. And they just said, oh, and they completely lied, and they said, that goes against our media policy. We can't have you guys come in here, take notes, record, whatever. I said, that's fine, we're not doing this for us. We don't need to have this on video. We don't need this for the future. We're doing this for the school, for the students. And we were not allowed access to the school. So I think that because of the lack of institutional means for students to give voices, there's a lot of pushback, and there's a limit to how much student voices actually matter. I think a lot of people, not necessarily the people in this room, of course, think that student voice is important, but only to the extent that it makes them look good. It's a great buzzword, but it's not always authentic, so.
Yeah, Justin, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Oh, definitely. I think that the whole idea of tokenization, soliciting advice from students or other marginalized, not marginalized, but like groups typically in these positions, it's important to take that advice into account when you're making those decisions so that you're not just soliciting that advice to solicit the advice. You're not just there because you heard it and nothing else. And I think that making an active effort not to tokenize voices of marginalized groups or students or anything like that, that's a really important step to take.
Perfect. I would like to pass this question off to, Marvin. How do you think that the school-to-prison pipeline fits into all of this?
I mean, we're writing kids off every day, right? So as we're speaking right now, some school administrators making a decision to send a kid straight from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse. And so one of the things that I'm very intentional about is using our work and the success of our work to really put the ownership back on our school systems to ask, why are you not doing better by our kids? And so we're taking a lot of the kids that school says, this is not the place for you. Go out into the community and figure your life out on your own. And for us, we're intentional about that, having conversations not only with our school systems, but the juvenile system, right? And when a kid is incarcerated, what kind of educational support are they receiving so that they can have an opportunity to get back into a traditional setting and be successful? And so a lot of those conversations are starting to happen because we are having success with what many in the school district quote label as the toughest population to serve. And so because of that, I'm now really having difficult conversations and saying, okay, so I took your toughest kids and I got them through the program and they're successful. Now, why are we not curating more preventative measures to ensure that kids don't have to come to 8 Million Stories to get an education? They can actually get it right in their local community schools. And so we're in a position now that I hope this is something that can become a trend across the city, across the country, where we're becoming a diversion program. So instead of incarcerating young people for nonviolent offenses, we're sending them to a program like 8 Million Stories where they can get the services, whether it's behavioral, mental health issues, academic services, and reintegrating those kids back into a traditional setting where they can get continued support, whether that's mentoring, case management with families and the students as well, to ensure that our kids actually have a fair shot at being successful in graduating from high school and going on to college or a career of choice.
Yeah. I think that the question that we ended our student panel was perfect. Like, where do we find hope? Where is it that you continue to find hope, especially as challenging information such as this report comes out? Where is it that hope lies? And then we can just go down the line. Yeah, that's important.
So last year, when the schools across the country, student voice, led to walkouts, to protest gun violence, our students had a small activity at our school where we challenged them to walk out of school and to move around the school to talk about injustices. And it was amazing to give them the historical background of like our community's fight, the Chicano blowouts of 1968. And what student voice led to, right? And that the reason why we're doing such hard academic work and requiring so much of you in this classroom is because people from our community fought for your rights to have an incredible education. And so that's why we're here, and that's why I believe so much in you, and that's why your families believe so much in you. So it's important that we continue to have this conversation with our kids and elevate their voices, but also that they understand where they come from, and the resources that our community has, and that they find empowerment in that. And then they start to see, some of my past students going to Ivy League colleges, right? So seeing the success of students who come from our communities doing these amazing things because they've believed in what we're doing in the classroom.
Perfect.
I think one of the things I'm excited about and hopeful about is one thing we're seeing locally in Houston is that not only are educators coming to the table, but we also have a lot of corporations coming to the table as well and having discussions around how can they bring resources and funding to help change the educational landscape in the city of Houston. And so that's really exciting because initially, you often just see educators having this conversation and trying to problem solve some of these difficult issues, but we're now getting a lot of different stakeholders coming to the table to really figure out a way to solve this issue. So I'm really hopeful for that, and I think more is to come out of that.
Perfect.
I think what makes me hopeful is the fact that I still get the opportunity to see schools who didn't get these 4 resources actually begin to understand. Clearly, they'll now know them as the 4 resources. They didn't when they were doing it. And I think the fact that there are examples of where adults can learn to do better on behalf of kids lets me know that it's possible.
Great.
I see a lot of hope in my generation, in Gen Z. I think you brought up all the activism after Parkland last year, and that really kind of made activism cool. And it was cool to go to the Women's March. It was cool to go to March for Our Lives. And so that was getting people out there. And I think, too, social media has a lot of ugly parts to it. But I think one of the benefits that I've seen, at least, is, I've had an Instagram account since I was 12 and a Twitter since I was 13. And while that can definitely be dangerous, it's led to I think it's led to a more connected world, and it's led to our generation being more empathetic and understanding of other people who live in other places that maybe we wouldn't get to interact had we not had the tool of the internet and the connectivity that social media has brought. And those numbers are only going to go down. People are only going to start using social media at a younger age, which again can be very, very dangerous. But at the same time, maybe that'll help us build more coalitions, come together, and see each other as people, not just the differences that we have.
I think I also see a lot of hope in young people and the potential for the future. But I also think that having recognized that teacher expectations are such a big part of this dialogue, stemming all of these self-perceptions of potential, right? What am I able to affect? What is my potential in order to pick a social issue and then work towards fixing that? That all stems from the classroom. And those expectations that people had of you to begin with are the ones that you, as you grow up, you develop for yourself and adopt for yourself and are impressed upon you. And so having dialogues about what teachers should be expecting of their students and what students should be expecting of their educations, starting from a very young age, is something that will empower them in the future to be able to make this social impact. And I think that that's what I really have a lot of hope for.
Perfect. I just want to conclude our panel by saying thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you for having this conversation in conjunction with students, and hopefully we can continue to do this. So if you'd all please join me for a round of applause. Cool. All right, cool. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Martine. That was great. Really well done. Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, how y'all doing? All right, I'll take that. I'll take that for now. So I want to thank most of all our student panelists. We're going to talk about recommendations. Yes, we got to get in it. We got to start changing some of these conditions that we studied, that we heard about from our students. But I want to thank Julie Basicki. I want to thank Martine. I want to thank Kimberly. I want to thank Justin. I want to thank Megan. We are honored by your presence, by your participation, by adding your intellect and your energy to this project. Thank you guys so much. And hey, our educators ain't bad either. By the way, if you want to talk to some folks, those of you who may be writing about education or in policy positions and you want to see truly where there is hope, please talk to Dr. Santelises, talk to Marvin, talk to Joshua. If you get a chance to see the inside of Joshua's classroom, you will see what it looks like when kids are getting the resources they need to succeed. So please, I know their inboxes are already pretty full, but please hit them up. You will come away extraordinarily hopeful. All right, so what specifically do we do about all this? Concretely, practically, what do we do about all this? We don't have the easy one, two, three-step how-to manual that we're going to change all of these deeply rooted systemic inequities that exist. But we do have some practical, I think, operational places to start. None of these, as Dr. Santelises said, none of these require billions of dollars. Most of them just require us reallocating time and focus. None of them require years of specialized preparation. We can begin to move the needle against the opportunity myth right now, today, for those kids who are sitting in classrooms all across the country right now. So, first, let's ask students and families directly about their goals, about their school experiences. Listen to what they share and then act on what they tell you. That can be as simple as making time for teachers and school leaders to spend time with families and with students at the beginning of the year to ask them about their goals. By the way, in our study, we found that teachers who frequently ask students about their interests and their aspirations saw much higher levels of engagement. And again, that engagement leads to student learning. Number two, make greater access to grade-appropriate assignments an urgent priority for all students, no matter their race, their background, their income level. their current performance level. Remember the classrooms where they got even somewhat more access to grade level assignments, we saw much higher student learning. We saw gaps closing quickly. This can be done, it is being done in places like Baltimore City schools. 3, let's give all students, especially those who are behind or perceived to be behind, access to instruction that asks them to think and engage deeply with challenging material. Let's start to shift the focus. We're all, including a TNTP, we're all spending a lot of time investing a lot of funding in training, supporting our educators, and preparing our new teachers and our new leaders. Let's shift the focus of that training and that prep to support educators, to help them build skills, to allow students more of an opportunity to think, to grapple, to grow with the most challenging material. 4, let's ensure educators enact high expectations for student success by seeing firsthand that students are capable of succeeding with more rigorous material. We're doing work in places like New Orleans, in places like Florida, where we see if we give teachers and leaders the opportunity to practice teaching grade-appropriate material with teachers who are behind or they perceive to be behind, they come out of that experience with much higher expectations for all students. And finally, let's conduct an equity audit everywhere to identify school and district level decisions from the diversity of staff at all levels, something that we heard about from Vasiki, Dr. Santelises, at all levels, to which students are enrolled in honors courses. That is on the cutting room floor, but we had plenty of data that showed there were inequities in terms of access to courses. And those decisions, those choices we make, give some students greater access than others to key resources. One thing that we can do, a great organization, for those of you who don't know, Education Trust, whose work we built on with this report, did a study. They found 115,000 students of color in New York State who are not going to get the opportunity to see even one teacher who comes from their race and ethnic background. That's a problem. We can begin to move the needle on that right away. So, as we close out our time together this morning, I'd like to leave you all with a call to action. If you want to take action right now, you can go to opportunitymyth.tntp.org, opportunitymyth.tntp.org, and get a personalized action guide. We have, folks, tools. We have practical tools. If you are a teacher, if you are a school leader, if you are a system leader, if you're a parent, if you're a student, and you want to begin to tear down the opportunity myth, we have practical tools. All the tools, in fact, that we use in this study are available to anybody, open source. So get a personalized action guide, make a commitment. If you're here with us today in DC, you can spend some time visiting with our student panelists. They've agreed to hang around until noon. Please spend some time talking to them, listening to them, asking them questions, and then make your own commitment today on social media. 2 more things. If you work inside the system, if you're a leader, if you're an administrator, if you're an educator, ask yourself a question. I spent 6 years working in the New York City public schools. I can tell you I would not have been able to answer this question at any point. Do you know which of your students are getting access to these critical resources? Which of your students are consistently given teachers and adults with high expectations? Which of your students are getting access to grade level assignments and which are not? And how often? If you can't answer that question, and again, I could not when I worked inside of a district, then take a look at our tools, use our tools, create your own opportunity scorecard to figure out in your community, in your system, in your school, in your network, what kind of experiences are students actually having? How can you lift up their voices and give them a seat at the table? How much opportunity are you giving some students versus other students? This can be done. It's not rocket science, folks. It doesn't cost a lot of money. If you're outside the system, if you're a student, if you're a parent, if you're an advocacy group, if you're a nonprofit, ask the same question of the system leaders in your community. Ask them, do they know? Do you know whether my child is getting a real opportunity to succeed? Do you know whether all children in our community are getting an opportunity to succeed. Ask it respectfully. Ask it in a supportive way. But if you don't get an answer, if the person you're talking to at the school board meeting or what have you can't answer that question, then suggest, recommend, advocate, mobilize. Make sure that next year that system is able to answer that question to you and all the other members of that community. So, I want to thank you very much for being here. I want to thank, again, our student panelists, our educators, Luis, our terrific moderator, and I want to thank all of my colleagues who worked so very hard, did tremendously creative, difficult, hard work to bring you the stories and the voices of students from across the country and to create a platform for us to hear from those students from here on out. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.